Good evening. My name is Wesley Ray. I am a graduate student with Grand Canyon University cellular biology class with Dr. Carrie Valentine. Today is going to be a presentation over bioelectromagnetism and other, let's say, less than typical ways of cells communicating with one another. Okay. As much as I'm sure that all viewers would love to just watch me talk, I will screen share so that we can go over our PowerPoint. I apologize for it being dark. It is quite dark and storming where I'm at right now. My wife is asleep in the next room. But we do what we can. Okay. Bioelectromagnetism and other cellular communication strategies. Learning objectives for this presentation. Understand the concepts of bioelectromagnetic communication and its potential implications. Okay. By the time this is done, you should be able to understand what I'm talking about when I say these words. They're kind of big, buzzy words. What does it mean? Okay. Become acquainted with some more unconventional cellular communication pathways that may prove significant, especially in up and coming research. Uh, Biology classes that people will sit through will talk about traditionally cell communication pathways that are mostly chemical signaling based, signal interactions that are going through signaling molecules or are the result of interacting with surface features in the cell membrane, surface ligands, things like MHC structures and things of that nature. Um, Going away from that and understanding that there's more going on behind the scenes than just physical and chemical interaction. Brainstorm ideas and look at published articles discussing methods for using these concepts therapeutically. The ultimate goal of understanding most of this stuff, there's two of them. One would be sort of the scientific curiosity of understanding it to understand it, which is cool, which is all good and well. I don't think anybody has a problem with that. But there's also the idea that there could be medicinal applications to this. There could be therapeutic uses to these things. And in fact, before we're done with the presentation, I'll point out a few of those with respect to cancer cases in particular. Okay. Oh, and bone regeneration. So, what is bioelectromagnetism? Bioelectromagnetism is defined as the interaction of magnetic fields within biological systems. Seems pretty straightforward. How do living things interact with magnetic fields? Bioelectromagnetism. Cool. You'll see this kind of go into different sub branches. I talk about one, piezo bioelectromagnetism, uh, which is kind of its own little sub branch on even this little sub branch of cellular communication. Um, but it all revolves around electric fields and other. Honestly, it's mainly electric fields. It's magnetic fields and how that affects cells. Okay. This was first proposed as early as 1932, and the terminology was a little bit different whenever they first proposed this. It's changed a little bit between then and now, and the understanding of it has certainly changed somewhat. But people were starting to document things as soon as 1932 related to this. And it is at the time, it was most documented and still is heavily documented today as being a big driving force in the development of embryos, being one of those things that helps to regulate the physical location of different growth factors and ionically charged molecules, things of that nature. Um, by regulating those things spatially, when cells divide, you can control which areas of embryos receive what let's say, precursor molecules for certain developments. It's different from conventional, what I'm going to refer to as conventional molecular cell signaling, which when I say that, I'm talking about what we've all kind of been educated on for all of our lives, chemical signaling mostly. due to the lack of molecular exchange or binding interactions. Okay. Cells that are doing this do not need to touch or even interact through direct interaction or indirect interaction. There's really no cellular interaction here that has to happen. Okay. That's kind of the beauty of the concept of bioelectromagnetism is without any kind of a chemical signal or chemical agent, cells can all sort of respond in unison to this overall field that they're all being exposed to equally. And you can generate very coordinated responses across hundreds or thousands of cells based on these fields, which I think is a cool phenomenon. Okay, so we're not talking about the standard signal molecule and receptor interactions here. That's the biggest thing that I want to go away from is that does not apply here. That's not what we're talking about. Why should we care about bioelectromagnetism or related studies? Studies are beginning to show that there are therapeutic uses surrounding cancer, that if you hit tumors and related tissues with certain low frequency magnetic fields, it can induce apoptotic behaviors. The mechanisms behind this are not always entirely understood. This is an ongoing field of research, and the common theme of this presentation that you're going to find is that we're beginning to find out that this works on a lot of things in a lot of different ways. We don't always fully understand the ways that they work. We're kind of just tinkering around with this at this point to tinker and see what it does. But the understanding to really truly break this down and make it simple, one of my favorite concepts in science is that if you can explain something or if you understand something, you should be able to explain it simply. Yeah, we can't do that with this yet. Studies are beginning to show negative effects from non-ionizing fields on our bodies. The study that I've got there is it was a study that was conducted that was showing that there was a relationship between the non-ionized weak fields being put off by power lines and the development of leukemia cases in young adults. And there was a weak relationship discovered in that study. I can't say causation. I can say correlation. Okay. But there appears to be a relationship between those things. And at the very least, in a time when we have all kinds of cell signals and electric signals and microwave signaling and infrared imaging and all of these infrared and radio and everything else, in a time when we have all of these different electromagnetic waves circulating around in our atmosphere, it would be useful to know if they're potentially harmful. Okay, that should make sense. Long-term exposure to fields emitted by power. Oh, okay. So I included that in there. I apologize. And then developments of improved signaling for improved monitoring of vitals through wireless transmitter implants. We can put implants into people that relay information about vitals. One of the most typical things that I conventionally would think of is like pacemakers and monitoring of heart rates over time. Understanding the individual magnetic fields or biofields of individual people helps us to design technologies that are not interfered with by those fields. When you apply an electromagnetic field to some electronic devices, surprise, surprise, that sometimes they don't work properly. So by understanding the biofields of organisms, you can kind of adapt the technologies you build accordingly to try to make this work better, which is another sort of indirect therapeutic plus that we would gain from understanding this concept. So how does it work? This person that I have linked, Chow, this guy was involved in a lot of studies. I read an article. He's got an article that I've provided in the references slide on this, where he talks about a 35-year career with these electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic research with respect to how they affect organisms. And this guy was involved in a lot of projects. Okay. In his early career, They were doing auditory tests on guinea pigs. Short bursts of electromagnetic microwaves induced a temperature shift or pressure shift in the inner ear large enough to invoke an auditory signal. So they were using microwaves essentially to see if guinea pigs could hear them. And the guinea pigs would give responses to these microwaves. And at first, they're like, whoa, what's going on here? And after further investigation, what's going on is the microwaves are actually causing a slight temperature shift in the cavity of the inner ear. And that temperature shift, because of Charles's law, which I've shown, is causing a pressure shift, an increase in volume of the air that is in that cavity. That is affecting the hairs in the inner ear and is causing action potentials through the auditory nerve. Okay. So it's causing an auditory signal, but it's not causing an auditory signal because it's electromagnetic fielding. It's causing a thermal shift in the inner ear cavity. Well, the US military got to thinking and they reached out to this same guy, Chow, and they were like, hey, maybe if you put an electromagnetic field out there, you can raise the temperature of the brain of an organism to the point where they fall over or have seizures. And in mice, the critical temperature shift was 8 degrees Celsius. They were pumping microwaves, electromagnetic radiation, into the heads of mice and rats to cause an 8 degrees Celsius temperature shift, wherein those mice and rats immediately go into seizure. Yeah, brains don't like that. When the mice would come back out of that, if the EM signaling was stopped, there was no permanent damage to the mice. But these were experiments that were of great interest to the U.S. Air Force in the 1980s and 1990s. Long-term dosing of EM spectra, again by the same researcher, different teams, were used on rabbits and rats over spans of months. And what was documented is that there really wasn't much of a behavior change. There really wasn't much of a change at all, except they stopped eating as much, and they had no notable shift in biomass. And so the researchers just concluded that essentially somehow their cells were using the energy of the EM spectra in place of the standard metabolic pathway. Again, the methods for this are not completely understood, but a person might be able to assume that it again has to do with a thermal shift, that perhaps the guinea pigs or rats or mice or whatever the test subject may be, perhaps they're just not expending as much energy to keep warm. Perhaps the EM spectra are generating warmth in biological systems. And that could account for less wasted energy and therefore less dietary requirement. That's purely my speculation. Okay, that's not something that this suggested. That's purely me talking out of nowhere. This researcher in the article that I've linked in the references kind of has this storied career of researching these things and finding that the results where EM spectra give results in experiments are often indirect. And most commonly, the results you see are actually some form of a thermal shift caused by electromagnetic energy, notably. So does it work? Yeah, it does. Turns out it does. Cells can be regulated through magnetic fields to maintain polarity. This would be important in coordinated systems like in your heart, where it's very important to maintain ionic balances across many different cells at the same time in unison, or to control the physical distribution of charged particles important to the cell cycle. This is important to cell cycle regulation. It's also very important in embryo development. Okay. Faint fields emanate across cell membranes from their own activities and those of larger multicellular structures. I believe the direction I'm going with this is cell membranes, that as cells move charged particles across their membranes, that there is a magnetic field that's generated. And yes, that is where I went. So yeah, you can get very small magnetic fields generated on the basis of individual cell activities, or if you have coordinated activities across multiple cells, such as what you would see with something very electrically active like the brain or the heart. You're going to find EM fields surrounding organs like that as well. Kind of a weird tangent off of this that I felt obliged to include. Piezo bioelectromagnetism. What I'm referring to here is electromagnetic fields generated in living organisms created by the compression or physical stress of usually crystalline structures. Okay. In the picture in the bottom right, there's a demonstration on how this works that uses quartz crystals. This is most commonly observed in crystalline structures, things like quartz or things like other crystalline things, but there is mineralization found in bone that also allows us to observe this in our own predominantly long bones. Okay, bones in the legs most commonly are what we observe this in. And as mechanical stressors are put on bones just by regular everyday use, electromagnetic fields are generated. And the thought is that this, through the manipulation of growth factors and through the manipulation of materials required to regenerate tissue, the thought process is that this is a system that the body can use to help facilitate the regeneration of bone tissue in the event of an injury, like a broken bone, where you need to repair a break or repair a fracture. Scientists have been looking into this as a potential explanation for ways that we could help improve bone healing for injuries, or in cases like osteoporosis, where you have prolonged conditions where if you could manipulate bone in a certain way, perhaps you could stimulate it to heal faster or to heal stronger than what was priorly thought possible. This is being explored as an alternative to traditional bone grafts. So this is not something that would be applicable in a lot of things, but it is an example of the bioelectromagnetism being applied, hopefully, for a therapeutic use in future cases. The article that I've linked, which is fairly recent, several PhDs involved in this, okay? A well-backed article from well-backed sources. And they come out in the article and straight up say, I think it's in the introduction of the abstract, that the processes through this are really not all that well understood. We're scratching the surface of this. But the consensus is that the majority of the effects that we see are either secondary effects, such as we explored earlier, where we have thermal shifts in relation to these EM spectra, or you have the manipulation of molecules inside of structures like bone, inside of structures like the heart and the brain. Okay. Yeah, it's a fascinating new development in biology. So, where is the research for this headed? The research is headed in a lot of different directions, but firstly and foremost, and if you haven't figured this out, we don't have a lot of answers in this. This is a very new sort of subfield inside of biology, inside of cell biology. Multiple studies indicate that there's a relationship between electromagnetic fields and biological processes, but the relationship is unknown or unclear. I've cited a couple different articles there that just kind of come out and say that. The most recent one I have there is 2021. I am certain that if a person scoured the internet for long enough, they could find an open source document that would say the same thing that was more recent. I feel like 2021 is recent enough to prove that point. But I've given a second article there to just sort of back it up. Okay. Research teams from all over the world. In the case of Chow, this person having a 35-year career and working with intimately with the U.S. government, working with the governments of the Soviet Union, now Russia, working with the governments of China, where the legal limits for available EM spectra in like air, just like what is allowed to be transmitted, the laws are different in the different countries, and there's interest in figuring out what is harmful and how much and prolonged exposure. And through careers like that, this guy still really doesn't understand why some of this stuff happens. And so that just goes to show you that our newest advancements are still trying to crack it, and sort of I want to say the term old heads that have been kind of doing this for a long, long time. And they really haven't cracked this either. Okay. We know it's important. We know it affects cells, and we have some generalized ideas on how that works. We have some specific applications for that technology, and that understanding. But as far as having an intricate understanding of the very precise ways that this can manipulate cells, we really don't. Okay. Greater clarification is absolutely needed in these areas for obvious reasons. But there's still more on the horizon for energy-based communications, however. Some of the more recent stuff is actually looking into photon-based communication. As different metabolic reactions are occurring in cells, energy can be released as energy is reduced in a system. Energy can be released as an extremely weak photon wave. And those photon interactions have been shown and documented to have effects on the growth rates of neighboring cells. Photon-based cell-cell communication can potentially be used to communicate with neighboring cells. In that study, that is growth rate. What they observed was that when cells are in close enough proximity to communicate in this way, they are limiting the growth rate of their neighbors. Okay. It is unclear if this is some type of competition, or if this has a different agenda to it, whatever the evolutionary advantage is to this. But that does appear to be what's going on. And I have my references. So, as we scroll back through, and I'm going to kind of go back here towards the beginning. Yeah. Bioelectromagnetism as a concept seems to me to be a fairly advanced one inside of biology. And I say that because this is kind of a frontier. And as I'm explaining this to you, I've studied this, and I went through articles, and I went through a lot of articles. I've listed 10 here because it was the requirement, but I've gone through several more that I didn't decide to include in this. And I've learned some stuff putting together this presentation, but I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. And when I read people's articles about this stuff, they have answers. They say, hey, this affects this. But this is one of those areas where if you ask why enough, people stop having the answer, which should be an indication that we don't really understand this well enough. For that reason, I would say that this should be a more advanced topic. I would find that this topic would be more appropriate in either cross classes, like dual credit classes for high school classes for college credit, or in a college setting. I don't find that this would be appropriate in a high school setting, because in a high school setting, I think, quite frankly, the oh so important time that they have in a high school classroom would be better devoted to more core topics in biology than this frontier fringe area of, some might call it, alternative medicine. Uh, and so I would say this is something that's best left to later on in their academic careers. Once again, it's an ongoing field. It's a frontier. I think it would be important to teach students about, because it's quite possible that this is something that we're going to see a lot of developments in our lifetimes. And so it would be nice to see the students of today become acquainted with this material, because this might be the relevant research that they undergo in their lifetimes. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. If anybody were to have any questions, they could reach out to my student email with GCU. But other than that, that is my presentation this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it, and have a good rest of your evening.